والسلام الأتمان الأكملان على خاتم النبيين وسيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. ما بعد، اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما إلى علمنا ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Inshallah, we'll continue with reading from the book known as the Musannaf of Abi Bakr Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Shaybah rahimahullah ta'ala rahmatan wasi'ah, who died in the year 235 after the Hijrah. And we're in the section that deals with Tahara, Kitab al-Tahara. And we've reached the chapter where the author, he says, فِي الرَّجُلِ يَتَبَلَّغُ بِالْوُضُوءِ إِبْطَةً. This chapter is regarding a person, a man or a person, who reaches up to his armpits while making wudu. He goes so far in making wudu that he reaches his armpits. What is the ruling of such an action? Is this something that is encouraged, preferable, mustahab? Is this something that is haram because it's a bid'ah? It's something that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam never did in an act of worship. Is it something that is acceptable, mubah, based on a person's understanding? These are all issues that the scholars have talked about. So from the Salaf, like Abu Hurairah, there were those who went past the limits of the areas that should be washed while making wudu. And they did so out of the understanding of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whoever amongst you is able to increase his ghurrah, that white shining area of his body that will be on the day of judgment because of the traces of wudu, whoever from amongst you is able to increase it, then let him do so. And likewise, their understanding of the narration, وَإِسْبَاغُ الْوُضُوء, and being extremely thorough in making wudu. So they say that increasing the area or increasing the white shining area and being extremely thorough in wudu is to go past the limit, i.e. past the elbow up into the forearm. And some of them might even go as far as their armpit. And so they say this is preferable because of their understanding of these narrations. And we've talked about this before. While some of them, they say no, the meaning of whoever is able to increase his ghurrah doesn't mean to make it a larger surface area, but to increase its brilliance and its radiance by performing an abundance of wudu, i.e. by performing an abundance of wudu for making salat, then let him do so. And they say that the meaning of the isbagh of wudu, or being extremely thorough in wudu, is making sure you cover every spot or washing a second and third time. And so this is something that has led them to a disagreement in this issue. Some of them say it's preferable or at least okay to go past the boundaries in making wudu, while others say no, it is haram, or at least makruh, to go past the boundaries. And this similar conversation carries over, or carries a little bit of the conversation about renewing the wudu. Because if we can't wash more than 3 times, and we can't go over the limit of where we're supposed to wash, then is there a justification for making a wudu when there's no need to do so? All of these are issues that, often some people might not understand the depth of why these are conflicts or why these are disagreements, but there is some basis for it amongst the Salaf. Going over the limit, washing more than 3 times when making a new wudu, washing 3 at most, and then renewing that, which is technically washing the body part more than 3 times, just in 2 different sittings. And so the verifier of this book, Sheikh Ash-Shithri, hafidhullah ta'ala, he says about this issue, about a person reaching up to his armpit while making wudu. He says that the قال الجمهور لا يستحب ذلك. The majority say that this is not something that is preferable. This is not something that is mustahab, i.e., therefore, it is something that is discouraged. It is not something that is preferable. And this statement saying it is not mustahab, it opens it to be haram or to be makruh, right? Because it's, as long as there's a subtlety in the way you word it. And this subtlety, it's something that should be paid attention to, right? Sometimes you ask a scholar a question and they might say something is laysa min as-sunnah. It's not from the sunnah. Does that mean it is a bid'ah? No. And that's part of the reason why sometimes they might avoid that phrase. So you might ask somebody a question and say, is it permissible to ask someone to make dua for me? And they say, laysa min as-sunnah. That doesn't mean asking someone to make dua for you is a bid'ah. Or you might ask someone about donating the reward of Quran that I've read to a family member. And they will say, laysa min as-sunnah, right? That's not from the sunnah. But does that mean it's a bid'ah? Not necessarily. And likewise, you might ask somebody, is it permissible to go past my elbow in wudu? And they would say, la yustahab. That's not something that's preferable. Does that mean it is haram or makruh? Not necessarily, but it's a way of cautiously giving that response without taking on the burden of actually directly saying it. And this is something that a person should be conscious of in their question when they receive an answer, and in their answers when they are responding to questions, to be careful not to surpass the boundaries of what they're capable of saying. And so he says that the majority says la yustahabbu dhalik, that is not preferable. Khilafan al-Shafi'i. And this is contrary to Shafi'i. The Shafi'i opinion is that it is preferable to go past the limit. And they say going past the limit is one way to ensure that you get the entirety of the area. And so you should go past the elbow up into the forearm at least. As for going all the way up to the elbow, the armpit, then I am not sure if that is the view of Shafi'i, but we'll see. Those who said it was okay and those who said that it wasn't. And so he says, Yani Abu Bakr ibn Abi Shayba, he says, حدثنا وكيع عن العمري النافع عن ابن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنه أو عنهما أنه كان ربما بلغ بالوضوء إبطه في الصيف. He says that Waki' narrated to us on the authority of Al-Umari, on the authority of Nafi' in Al-Umari, Ubaydullah ibn Umar ibn Hafs ibn Asim Al-Umari. He says that Waki' narrated to us on the authority of Al-Umari, on the authority of Nafi', on the authority of Ibn Umar. Yani Nafi', he said about Ibn Umar, radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, that he used to perhaps reach all the way up to his armpits when making wudu in the summertime. He would perhaps go all the way up to his armpits when making wudu in the summertime. And we see the logic there, right? Not saying that it's a religious issue that's suitable or not suitable, but if nothing else, we see the logic behind his action. In the summertime, individuals sweat and their underarms carry a smell. And like we mentioned before, that a lot of the time when you see people talk about these issues of wudu in circumstances where it's not necessary, it's not necessarily because that they say that wudu is necessary for that action or preferable for that action, but more so from the aspect of if you're going to do something, it might as well be a wudu. And so likewise, this situation here, Ibn Umar washing up to his armpits, it has a purpose that might not necessarily be part of wudu, but since I'm here making wudu, I might as well wash my armpits as well to remove the odor that might be in them. So is this an action of Ibn Umar going further in wudu or doing something else while making wudu, which could be two different issues. And there's a subtlety there. Is this Ibn Umar washing up to his armpits while making wudu? And so you would say he did more in wudu than might have been legislated. Or was it that while making wudu, he also decided to wash out his armpits? And that is a completely different topic. If so, can an individual do something else while making wudu? For example, nowadays you might find some of us, when making wudu and we're washing our faces, after we've washed our faces 3 times, we might also clean our nose or get in our eyes after we've washed our faces 3 times, right? Or we might wash our hands again to get the snot that we might have sent when we were blowing out. And so we end up washing our hands again before wiping our faces, right? Somebody washes their hands and then they wash their mouth and their nose and they blow out the snot, and they might have snot on their hand. And so they wash their hands again before washing their faces. Would we say that they've washed their hands multiple times in wudu? Or did they just do another action while they were making wudu? And if you say that they did another action while making wudu, it's not that they did something more. If somebody's neck was itching, and so while making wudu, or they had some dirt on their neck, and so while making wudu and when they wiped their head, they decided to wash off their neck as well. Is that them adding to wudu, or is that them doing another action while making wudu? And so those things are necessary to be considered. And this action of Ibn Umar, on the surface, it would seem as if he's doing another action while making wudu. Not that he was making wudu all the way up to his armpits. It could be understood that way. It could be understood that he would just go up to his armpits, but the clause or the qualification of Nafi' saying during the safe, during the summer, is what leads us to believe that that was something that he would do for a purpose, and that purpose could be the smell in one's underarm. And so therefore it's not necessarily an action of wudu, but more so an action because of the circumstance, i.e. doing another action while making wudu. Now, the next narration, he says, حدثنا وكيع عن عقبة ابن أبي صالح عن إبراهيم أنه كره. He says that Waki' narrated to us on the authority of Uqbah ibn Abi Ibrahim. On the authority of Uqbah ibn Abi Salih. On the authority of Ibrahim, yani Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. He used to dislike that. Yani Uqbah ibn Abi Salih, he said that Ibrahim used to dislike going all the way up to the armpits while making wudu. And there's a benefit in this, even with the subtlety that we mentioned earlier. And that is, even if somebody is doing an action that isn't part of the worship, if it can be perceived as a part of the worship, then it is better to avoid it, to avoid leading to misunderstanding in the religion. And this is an answer you find the scholars talking about often when they talk about things that might be permissible, generally speaking, but when people perceive that to be part of the religion is when it becomes a problem. So, for example, raising the hands after salah and making dua. Is there anything wrong with making dua? The answer is no. Is there anything wrong with raising the hands when making the dua? In certain circumstances, the answer is no. And just generally speaking, raising the hands is part of dua. But when somebody does that action on a constant basis, then that action starts to resemble the religion. Because we know that after the salat, for example, there are actions that the religion legislates, saying astaghfirullah 3 times, the various adhkar and ad'iyah that should come after the salat. So if one raises his hands and makes dua constantly after salat, that starts to get perceived as the religion. And so in that circumstance, we would tell a person to not raise their hands after dua, after salat when making dua, even though generally speaking, raising your hands, making dua is acceptable. And like this, there are a lot of examples where somebody might do something, maintaining a specific dua in a circumstance, always saying the same dua in a particular circumstance, if there's no legislation for it, then this might resemble the religion. And so we would tell a person to abandon it as not to cause confusion, that somebody might see them doing this action and think that this is part of the religion. And how beneficial is the definition of bid'ah that was given by Ash-Shatibi rahimahullah ta'ala in his book Al-I'tisam, where he talks about bid'ah being anything that competes with the religion, right? And he doesn't necessarily make it something that a person is doing specifically to get closer to Allah that wasn't legislated, right? As some of the definitions of bid'ah stated. But he mentions it as anything that can be taken as a competition with the religion. Ma yudahi ash-shari'ah, right? It competes and it resembles and it takes the place of the religion. And so when somebody does these actions that can be taken as religion and seen as part of the Sharia, then this is where the criticism comes. Even if the action by itself, there was no problem with it. So, for example, we mentioned that washing one's underarms while making wudu, knowing that that action isn't part of the wudu, there's no problem with that. Somebody talking while making wudu, doing another action while making wudu, that does not affect their wudu. But at the same point in time, if that action becomes constant to where somebody considers that, or somebody could see that person and think that this is part of the religion, then that is where we would say to the person, no, I don't like you doing that action. I don't like you washing your underarms every time you make wudu. Now you're doing something that competes with the religion. But if they said, well, no, I know it's not part of the wudu, it's just, while I'm here, that's usually when I remember. We would tell them, no, I think it's better to finish your wudu first, and then go back and wash your underarms so that nobody thinks that this becomes part of the religion. Your children don't see you and think that my Abby used to wash his underarms when making wudu. And so this is an example of how the scholars would dislike something, not because in and of itself it was haram, but because it led to a confusion in the religion and an unclarity in the religion. And like this, you find a lot of examples, right? From the things that I personally dislike is some of the laziness that comes, for example, like with the munasabah of Ramadan approaching and giving zakat al-fitr. Most people don't know how to give zakat al-fitr. And so they just buy a bag of rice and they just buy the biggest bag of rice they can. And they say the extra is sadaqah. And is there anything wrong with giving sadaqah? Absolutely not. Giving extra is no problem. وَمَن تَطَوَّعَ خَيْرًا فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَهُ. And whoever gives extra, then it's good for him. But their giving of extra, and likewise in regular zakat, people who consistently pay their zakat early, who take just the one time of year approach where I'm just going to pick a month and pay the zakat on everything that I have, and I'm not going to focus on the calculation and knowing how much is necessary or not, and I'll just give extra even if I don't need to. Is there anything wrong with that? The answer is no, generally speaking. There's nothing wrong with giving extra. There's nothing wrong with paying early. All of that is permissible. But you start to see nowadays how that action has become the religion, to where nobody knows what is their zakat and what isn't their zakat. And nobody knows how much is fitr and how much isn't fitr. And when they give it, they just give a bag of rice, or they just give 2.5% of everything that they have. And then that mind state, that mentality, it carries over, and it eventually leads to people thinking that zakat is just 2.5% of everything that you have, or that zakat al-fitr is just a bag of rice, a 5-pound bag of rice. But nobody really knows the details of the religion, because they have started to do this action constantly, and until it became like it was the religion. And the same thing can be said about the subha, the beads, and all of these things, to where people started taking those things that might by theory be okay, right? A subha in theory could be okay. But when it was taken the way that it was taken, until it's almost as if it's part of the religion and competes with something that the Allah and his messenger legislated, from the usages of the finger, or from the usage of the fingers, then that's when it became the problem. And so this is an example, or these are examples similar to what Ibrahim al-Nakha'i mentions regarding how he would dislike washing the underarm while making wudu. And that is even if we say that the action isn't part of wudu. While if we say that a person thinks that washing the underarms is part of wudu, then that is innovation, because there's no proof for that. That's something that Allah and his messenger did not legislate. And so there's no evidence for it, generally speaking. But if somebody does it while making wudu every once in a while, then there's no problem. But if it is done in a way that it becomes customary and habitual and normal, then that's when we start to have a problem with it. The next narration, he says, is حدثنا ابن فضيل and عمارة بن القعقاع, or عمارة. عمارة ولا عمارة? I want to say عمارة ibn القعقاع. عمارة بن عمارة بن القعقاع ابن شبرمة الضبي. عمارة بن القعقاع ابن شبرمة الضبي. عمارة. He says حدثنا فضيل ابن فضيل عن عمارة بن القعقاع عن أبي زرعة أنه قال دخلت مع أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه دار مروان فدعا بوضوء فتوضأ فلما غسل ذراعيه جاوز المرفقين فلما غسل رجليه جاوز الكعبين إلى الساقين فقلت ما هذا؟ قال هذا مبلغ الحلية. Now this is, and even though this doesn't mention going to the armpits, this is the justification and the reasoning that the people who say it's permissible to go past the legislated boundary in wudu, so you start into the other part of the body, this is what they use as a proof. This narration and things similar to it. Abu Bakr says that Ibn Fudayl narrated to us on the authority of Umara, on the Ibn al-Qa'qa', on the authority of Abi Zur'ah, who said that I entered along with Abi Hurairah into the home of Marwan ibn al-Hakam, who was at that time the governor of Medina. And he, i.e. Abu Hurairah, requested wudu. He requested some water for making wudu. Wudu with a fatha is water that is used for making wudu. And then Abu Hurairah made wudu. When the water was brought, he made wudu. And when he washed his forearms, his dhira', when he washed his forearm, jawaz al-mirfaqain, he went past his elbow. When he washed his forearm, he went past his elbow. And when he washed his feet, he went past his ankles up into his shin. When he washed his feet, he went past his ankles up into his shin. Abu Zur'ah, he says, I said to him, what is this? What are you doing? Right? Why are you going past the limits that Allah mentioned in the Quran? Allah mentioned in the Quran, فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ. Right? So why are you going past these boundaries? What is this? And Abu Hurairah responded to him by saying, هَذَا مَبْلَغُ الْحُلِيَةِ. This is the extent that the decoration or the adornment will reach. Meaning to the extent that you wash will be the extent that the bright white light that will shine from you on the day of judgment from the traces of wudu, to the extent that you wash is the extent that that trace will reach. And so Abu Hurairah used to go into the next body part to try to increase that area. And this was his understanding of whoever amongst you is able to increase his ghur, then let him do so. And likewise, this was his understanding of the hadith about being intensive or extensive in wudu, wa isbag al-wudu. So this was the understanding of Abu Hurairah. And like this, you found some of the Salaf adopting it, like a Shafi'i, to say to go past the boundary until you start into the next body part, to ensure that you get the entirety of the necessary body part. And so they consider this to be a part of wudu. And that's why they say that it is preferable while not necessary. And that statement has some validity to it. But we would look at what was the rest of the action of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba. Did the rest of them interpret it that way? Or was this something that was unique with Abu Hurairah? And this type of mind state is the mind state that is adopted by people who often go past the boundaries, whether it to be on the safe side or to accomplish a greater reward. But the reality of it is that going past the boundaries or stopping short of them to be on the safe side or to accomplish a greater reward is not something that the legislation came with, generally speaking. So, for example, when it comes to fasting, right, we're talking about fasting as we approach the month of Ramadan, you find that a lot of people will fast past Maghrib just to be on the safe side and to accomplish a little more reward. Similar to how Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu might have went past his elbow to be on the safe side and accomplish a little bit of reward. And so they'll compare between the two. But when we look at the sunnah, we found that the sunnah did not come with such an action. Instead, the sunnah was against that action of fasting a little extra to be on the safe side or to think that that was going to get you some reward. Instead, the Prophet encouraged us to rush and break our fast and told us that the good of this nation is based on how fast we break our fast, because it shows us how fast we apply the sunnah and how hard we are in applying the sunnah. And so when it comes to being on the safe side and trying to do a little bit extra, you find that often the religion doesn't come with encouraging such ideas. Don't fast or stop eating, maybe 20 minutes before Fajr just to be on the safe side. The religion didn't come with that concept. Instead, it encouraged us to continue to eat and drink until it's clear. Even if the adhan is being called and the drink is still in our hand, to finish our need from it. And there's so many examples of this where that concept of being on the safe side is not something that is encouraged, or thinking that you're going to get a little bit more reward in a way that wasn't legislated isn't something that's encouraged. A person putting on their ihram from the Prophet's masjid to go make umrah from Medina. When they said that to Imam Malik, they said it's just a few extra steps. And Imam Malik said, I worry about for you the fitna. So the point of it is that this issue of being on the safe side is something that you find often that Islam doesn't necessarily encourage to do something with the idea of being on the safe side, or to try to get a little bit more reward in a way that wasn't legislated. Instead, the safe side is doing what was legislated, and the reward is contingent on to the extent that you are obedient. That being said, there is times when this concept can be confused with another concept, and that is the concept of avoiding the doubtful matter, or avoiding that which is permissible in order to protect against doing haram. So, for example, there might be a circumstance where the action itself is permissible, but it's mixed up with something that is haram. And so an individual avoids the permissible portion to protect themselves from the impermissible portion, like eating the food of those who their money is contaminated with permissible and impermissible. And so they avoid the halal portion out of fear that they might end up into the haram portion. Other examples of when, preventative measures, what they call an issue, said the dhari'ah or said the dhara'i, blocking off the haram before it happens, are things that a person might make haram in order to stop something else that is haram from happening. And so this is a detailed issue, and the issue of preventative measures is a proof in the Hanbali madhab and others, but that's something that needs to be looked at. But in general, the religion doesn't legislate to be on the safe side, meaning you can't add into the religion with the concept of being on the safe side. And you can't add into the religion with the concept of I'm going to get more reward. Instead, the safe side is what the religion came with. And the reward is based on how you follow what the religion came with. And so this action of Abu Hurairah, if you understood the text the way that he did, then this is ijtihad. And this is a concept that a lot of people make mistakes in when they say things like the Sahaba innovated. The Sahaba did bid'ah. And so there's good bid'ah and there's bad bid'ah. They say, look at Abu Hurairah. This is a bid'ah according to you guys, right? According to the Salafis, going above the arm, you might say that this is a bid'ah. The Prophet didn't do it. And Abu Hurairah was trying to get closer to Allah in a way that the Prophet didn't legislate. That's the definition of bid'ah. But these people, they don't understand. One, the Sahaba anything the Sahaba did is not classified as bid'ah. You cannot classify an action of the Sahabi as innovation. The most that it would be is a Sahabi doing ijtihad, exercising his view of the text. In ijtihad, even if it is wrong, can't be considered innovation. Ijtihad, when wrong, we don't classify it as innovation. Let alone if it was right, we don't classify it as innovation. So when a Sahabi does something that if somebody who wasn't a Sahabi did and came up with, right? Let's say that the first person to wash past his elbow was me. And I said, well, I'm washing past my elbow to increase the level or the area of the adornment that will be given on the day of judgment. We would say, no, Abdul Hakim, that's innovation. Because you are not somebody who is of the position of doing that. And nobody before you did that, if I was the first person to have done it. But when the Sahaba do it, because they were there during the time of legislation, and they were the first people to do things, if they did it, then that would be what we call ijtihad. The Sahaba exercising their view and their understanding of the text. And so you can't classify it as innovation. So from the things that distinguish between our actions and their actions is that if nobody before us did it, and we were the first ones to understand it this way, then it would be more likely considered innovation. because that would mean that the best generations abandoned it. But if the best generations understood it that way, even if one of them, we can't say that it's innovation because they are the generations that we look to for understanding. And so if somebody from them understood it that way, the worst thing that it could be is them exercising their understanding of the text. And so we wouldn't call it innovation. So based on that, if a person today believes that the narration about increasing your ghur, your illuminated area, if they believe about it what Abu Hurairah believed about it, that you can increase the surface area, and so they do so, then we can't criticize them because they're following a salaf. They're following Abu Hurairah. Even if we think that that action is wrong, and this is obviously something that an opinion can be had in, and so it's not something that we give the classification as being a statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But instead, this is an action of a Sahabi in his view, but we have to look and see, is there something more accurate than that? Now, so that's the narration of Abu Hurairah. The next narration, he says, حدثنا علي بن مسهر أن يحيى بن أيوب البجلي عن أبي زرعة أنه قال دخلت على أبي هريرة فتوضأ إلى منكبيه وإلى ركبتيه فقلت له ألا تكتفي بما فرض الله عليك من هذا؟ قال بلى ولكني سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول مبلغ الحلية مبلغ الوضوء فأحببت أن يزيدني في حليتي أن يزيدني في حليتي. Now, Ibn Abi Shaybah, he says that Ali ibn Mushir narrated to us on the authority of Yahya ibn Ayyub al-Bajali, on the authority of Abi Zur'ah, who said that I entered upon Abi Hurairah and he was making wudu up to his shoulders. When he would wash all the way up to his shoulder. He would wash his arm all the way up to his shoulder. And if you go up to your shoulder, then that shows that you would go up to your armpit. And when he would wash his feet, i.e., he would wash all the way up to his knees. So Abu Hurairah, when making wudu, he would wash all the way up to his shoulder and all the way up to his knees. Abu Zur'ah, he said to him, aren't you sufficed by that which Allah has made mandatory upon you? Isn't what Allah made mandatory upon you as it relates to you washing in wudu enough? Why are you doing so much more? Why are you going past the boundary that Allah set? Allah said, wash your arms up to the elbow and wash your feet up to the ankles. Why are you going past that up to your shoulder, up to your knee? Abu Hurairah, when this was said to him, he said, of course, what Allah has mentioned is sufficient. But I heard the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, saying, the extent of your adornment, i.e., that shining light that you'll have on the day of judgment from the traces of wudu, the extent of your adornment is the extent that your wudu reaches. So to whatever level your wudu reaches, then that's where your adornment will shine. Abu Hurairah said, and I love that Allah would increase me in my adornment. And so that's why Abu Hurairah went past those levels, understanding this hadith. One aspect of critiquing this opinion is that it might lead a person to doing more than what Abu Hurairah did, and it opens that doorway. A person might say, well, I'm going to wash into my neck, right? And you all might have heard the position that washing the neck in wudu, is that from the sunnah or is that bid'ah, right? If a person's thinking like Abu Hurairah, they might say, well, no, I just want to increase the level. Or I might wash my head down to my back. Or I might wash my arms all the way over to my chest. And even though there's a clear answer for these things, that these issues that Abu Hurairah went extra in were the limbs that were legislated. So he didn't go extra into limbs that weren't legislated. He didn't go into his chest because washing the chest isn't part of wudu. But the arm is. And so he would go extra into the arm. He didn't go into his midsection, his torso, because the torso isn't part of the wudu, but the legs are. So he would go into his knees. The point of it is that the critique of that position is it could open the doorway for somebody with improper thought and error in their understanding to say, well, I'm going to wash the entirety of my body so that it will glow when making wudu. And like this, they destroy the purpose or the legislation of wudu and how Allah Azza wa Jal gave it its boundaries. Now, so this is from the understanding of this issue regarding going into the area past the limit of making wudu. We'll stop at this amount. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم وسبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. The next chapter will be regarding a man في الرجل يتوضأ فيطأ على عذرة, a person who makes wudu and then steps into some feces. We'll stop at this amount. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.